At this point, I just want to be able to go live. It's looking like that's working. Okay, so if I can get this to go live on YouTube, then I can just go ahead and start teaching. Yeah, so that way I have the VOD people can go back to if they want to find it. We can send that out. Okay, so I'm going to go ahead and start teaching. We are in, I don't think anybody's in here. I think we lost everybody. Trying to give y'all a second to find it again. Yeah. So I just got the notification for YouTube. I can't believe this happened on the first night of us going live on TikTok. All right, if you are here, type in the chat. Amanda, don't type in the chat. If you have discovered our stream and you are here with us, let me know. There's a bit of a delay, so it may take y'all a couple seconds to hear me say that and then type in the chat. But if I don't see anybody in, I'll say 4 minutes. If I don't see anybody hop back in another 4 minutes, I'm just going to call it for this week. Hey, Ryan said she's here. Okay. And joined on TikTok. Awesome. Thank you so much for joining us. I don't see the other people that were here earlier coming back, but I'm just going to have to go ahead and get started. All right, so we're in verse 32. So in verse 32, they're kind of rapid firing a whole bunch of different people all at once, and then they just start to talk about events that happened throughout the Old Testament. So what we're going to do for the remainder of this Hall of Faith, before we get to chapters 12 and 13 of Hebrews, is we're going to talk about these specific people listed in this verse, and then we're going to move on to chapter 12. So it talks about Gideon. We're talking about Gideon tonight. It talks about Gideon, Barak, Samson, Jephthah, David, and Samuel. So those are who's left on our list before we move on. So tonight, we're talking about Gideon. We're talking about Gideon's 300 tonight. If I can get my notes back up. Hey, what do you know? So that's going to be Judges chapter 7 tonight. That's what we're talking about. And this is a really cool story. I love this story. And Judges 7 it's sort of the continuation of Judges 6, because we're introduced to Gideon in chapter 6. And when these Midianites come in and they start to invade, he grabs a whole bunch of his food and his stuff, and he goes and hides in his barn. And he's scared for his life. An angel shows up, calls him a mighty man of valor, and starts having this conversation about what the Lord wants him to do. And so we pick up here in chapter 7 as he's done some of those things and has begun to gather an army together. And we're going to see that. Here in verse 1 it says, Then Jerubbaal, who is Gideon, actually got that nickname in the last chapter, and all the people that were with him rose up early and pitched beside the well of Herod. Or that might be Herod, so that the host of the Midianites were on the north side of them by the hill of Moreh in the valley. So they are joining up. They are trying to come together to free the people of Israel from the Midianites that have come in and invaded. The Lord said unto Gideon in verse 2, The people that are with thee are too many for me to give the Midianites into their hands, lest Israel vaunt themselves against me and say, Mine own hand hath saved me. So this is what God is saying. Gideon has gathered as many mighty men as he possibly could. All the people willing to go into battle, he's gathered them together. And God says, you know what, Gideon, as a matter of fact, there's too many people. You have too many people. Because if I give you the victory now, you're just going to say, hey, look at how good I am. Look at all my elims. I did this myself. And it's going to be like, no, you didn't do it. God did it. And he says, I want to make sure you guys know that. So we're going to have to cut her down a little bit. So we start in verse 3, and what we see first of all this evening is that they're smaller in number but greater in power. In verse 3, he says, "Now therefore go to, proclaim in the ears of the people, saying, Whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return and depart early from Mount Gilead," which is where they are, "and there returned of the people 22,000. He said, hey, if anybody's fearful, if anybody's scared of going to war, go home. And 22,000 people went home, and there remained 10,000. Okay, 10,000 still sounds like a lot. We might be pretty good here. And the Lord said unto Gideon, the people are yet too many. Bring them down unto the water, and I will try them for thee there. Oh, good. Yay. I was so hoping you were going to try them for me and then cut the numbers down again. And God says, and it shall be that of whom I say unto thee, hey, thank you so much for the 100 coins. I have no idea what that means, but I super appreciate it. It says that it shall be that of whom I say unto thee, this shall go with thee, the same shall go with thee. And of whomsoever I say unto thee, this shall not go with thee, the same shall not go with thee. Seems pretty self-explanatory, except for the fact that we don't always want to do that, do we? Sometimes God says, hey, you're taking this easy road. I really want you to take this hard road over here. And we say, yeah, okay. Double type the screen to, oh. Cool, I didn't know that. So in verse 5 it says, he brought down the people unto the water. And this is actually kind of cool, the way that he divides the people up here. The Lord said unto Gideon, everyone that lappeth of the water with his tongue, as a dog lappeth, him shalt thou set by himself. Likewise everyone that boweth down upon his knee to drink. And the number of them that lapped, putting their hand to their mouth, were 300 men. But all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink water. Hey, thank you so much for the... Oh, that's cool. It did a thing. I didn't know it could do that. But all the rest of the people bowed down upon their knees to drink water. And the Lord said unto Gideon, by the 300 men that lapped will I save you, and deliver the Midianites into thine hand, and let all the other people go every man unto his place. In other words, back home. So the people took victuals in their hands and their trumpets, and sent all the rest of Israel, every man unto his tent, and retained those 300 men, and the host of Midian was beneath them in the valley. Now, that doesn't seem like a big deal until you realize they're going against a huge group of people. And they just went from 32,000 people to fight, to 10,000 people to fight, to 300. It's an army of 300 going against an army many, many times larger than them. So this is what they've just gone through. And I want to look at a couple of the things that God said to Gideon about how he was going to determine who would stay and who would leave. So one of the things is, whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return. In other words, go back home. So these people that are afraid, that's not an ideal trait, right? Cowardice is not an ideal trait when looking for a soldier. Oh, that's cool. I got a little hat. Oh, the hat's gone. That's sad. But it takes courage. I can pop back and forth. This is not going to be a problem for me at all. I just hope y'all can keep up. It takes courage to take on an enemy and fight against the odds, right? But that's life, isn't it? Like what Gideon's going through here is so much like life for so many of us. You know, we are fighting the odds. We are trying to accomplish something, and sometimes it's hard. Sometimes it's very, very hard. But, you know, that's because the Lord wants us to give him the victory for this. He wants to give him credit where credit's due. You know, the life of a disciple is not for the faint of heart. It takes a courageous heart to take on the enemies of the world, the enemies of ourself, right? And the enemies of the devil. I missed the last one. Is a baby ghost. Oh. So we have to have courage to take on these enemies, right? Because when I say about taking on these enemies. What I mean is we fight a spiritual battle, right? Ephesians 6 talks about this invisible battle, right? But we don't wrestle against flesh and blood. So when I say that we're fighting these enemies aren't actual people, right? And I so want people to understand this. For the Christian, our enemies are not the atheist, okay? They're not our enemies. Our enemies are not people of other Christian denominations. Our enemies are not even other religions. These people are not our enemies. People are not our enemies. When we say the enemies of the world, we don't necessarily mean the people of the world. What we mean is the temptations to do the things that we as Christians know that we shouldn't do, that we find frequently in the world. Now, the world does them because they don't know any better, right? They don't follow their lives according to the Word of God like we do. But when we know better, we should live differently. And when we live differently, we're going to be out in a world that tempts us with these things, right? So that's what we mean when we say the enemies of the world. And we also have an enemy within ourselves. I love this quote. I heard this quote one time. You have two dogs inside of you all the time. The one that wins is the one you feed more. Thank you so much. I appreciate that. And it's so true of us as well. And the Bible talks about, the flesh wrestling against the old man, wrestling against the new man. And it's basically the things that we know we should do versus the things that we actually want to do that we know we shouldn't do. And that fight in us is something we have to take on as well. And also, there is a devil out there. There is a devil. He has fallen angels. There are demons out there. And they are out to take you down. Mentally, emotionally, spiritually. They want to destroy you. They would destroy you physically if they could. Christians are protected by the Lord in many ways. But if in whatever way he can get you, he's going to try and get you. And we have to prepare for those invisible spiritual battles. The Bible says in 1 Corinthians 16:13, watch ye, stand fast or strong, stand firm in the faith. Quit ye like men, be strong. When it says quit ye like men, it doesn't actually mean men, by the way. It just means, be brave and be strong and be tough and stand strong in the faith. Almost like a watchman on the wall. He's looking out of the city. He's trying to see if the enemy's coming in. That's what we're supposed to be doing. So whosoever is fearful and afraid, let him return. We have to be brave. We have to be strong and face these enemies of the world. He also says, by 300 men that lapped will I save you. And I talked about how much I love that because it speaks of the kind of man that God is interested in serving him. Right? Because the difference between those that lapped the water and those that dropped to their knees to drink was a matter of diligence. Right? Diligence is very, very important because the 300 men that lapped the water were more watchful. They were more aware than those that just fell to their knees in exhaustion and just thirst and just began to drink without paying attention to what was going on around them. And the same thing's true for us as well. Sometimes you get exhausted. Sometimes you get weary, especially if you've got, people at home you come home to and you just want to fall apart and just, veg out, and you've got responsibilities. Maybe you've got, pets, or you've got kids, you've got a spouse or somebody you're going home to, and you just want to fall apart and you can't. Maybe somebody calls you when you're having a bad day or you're really frustrated and something's happening. They don't know that. And we just want to just sort of fall to our knees and fall apart and just blow up at the whole world. We have to be diligent. 1 Peter 1:13 says, wherefore gird up the loins of your mind. Be sober and hope to the end for the grace that is brought to you under the revelation of Jesus Christ. So when it says be sober, it is not actually talking about, not being drunk. That's not what it's talking about. But also when it says be sober, it doesn't necessarily mean be boring. That's not what it means either. It means you live your life and enjoy your Christian life and enjoy the things that God has blessed you with. But at the same time, keep your eye out, right? I didn't really understand this too fully until I became a dad, right? So as a dad, when our family loves shopping. They love going to Target. They love hitting the dollar section and then moseying their way to the more expensive sections later. We love shopping. And when my family goes shopping, the kids are here and mom is here and they're all hanging out and I want to have a good time. But at the same time, I got to have my eye out. looking at the strangers walking around, looking at who's trying to get between me and my kids, because that can't happen, right? The people that might be a risk, when I tell my kids, hey, come here, and I've got to have my watchful eye out all the time, but at the same time, I want to have fun with my family. And you can do both of those things. And it's the same way with the Christian life. Have fun, live your life, but at the same time, keep an eye out, because the devil's out there somewhere trying to mess things up for you. 1 Peter 5:8 says again, be sober, be vigilant, right? So that's what it means, being vigilant. Because your adversary, the devil, as a roaring lion walketh about, seeking whom he may devour. That the devil wants to devour. He wants to destroy you. He wants to ruin your life, ruin your mind, ruin your heart. And if we'll be diligent and we'll stay faithful to the Lord and to his word, when we resist the devil, the Bible says he'll flee from us. And that's such an important thing to remember. So the story picks up again in verse 9. It said, it came to pass the same night that the Lord said unto him, arise, get thee down unto the host, for I have delivered it into thine hand. So in the middle of the night one night, God wakes Gideon up and he says, I want you to walk down to where this enemy is, because I want to show you something very special. That would be a very scary thing to do, wouldn't it? To just kind of sneak into the enemy camp and hope you don't get caught and tortured and killed. That'd be a very scary thing. He says in verse 10, but if thou fear to go down, which of course most people would, especially Gideon, whose natural inclination in fight or flight is to flight, right? So he says, if thou be fearful to go down, go thou with Purah thy servant down to the host. And we're going to come back to that person in just a few minutes. But in verse 11, he says, and thou shalt hear what they say, and afterwards shall thy hand be strengthened to go down unto the host. Then when he went down with Purah his servant to the outside of the armed men, under the outside of the armed men that were in the host, and the Midianite and the Amalekite and all the children of the east lay along in the valley like grasshoppers for multitude. There was a lot of these guys out there, and their camels were without number as the sand by the seaside for multitude. There was a lot of these guys out there. And when Gideon was come, behold, there was a man that told a dream unto his fellow and said, behold, I dream a dream, and lo, a cake of barley bread tumbled into the host of Midian, and came unto a tent, and smote it that fell, and overturned it, and the tent lay along. You know what I think that means? I think that means this guy had one too many jalapeno peppers before bedtime. That sounds like a weird dream. But in verse 14, his fellow answered and said, this is nothing else save the sword of Gideon, the son of Joash, a man of Israel. For into his hand hath God delivered Midian and all the host. And it was so that when Gideon heard the telling of the dream and the interpretation thereof, that he worshipped and returned into the host of Israel and said, arise, for the Lord hath delivered into your hand the host of Midian. So we've seen a lot of things talked about, but God is encouraging Gideon here and had him do this really scary thing so that he could find the confidence to go into this battle knowing God is going to give you this victory. Right? So God tells him to get down into the host. And we talked about this a second ago, right? But he asked him to go down in the middle of the Midianite camp where all of these mighty soldiers are. God was asking him to do something he wasn't sure he could do. He was scared, and God knew that he was scared. But when Gideon looked in the mirror in the mornings when he woke up, what he saw were his flaws. He saw his failures. You ever do that when you wake up in the morning and you go in there and you're like, oh my gosh, my eyes are so baggy. My hair is a mess. I need to really, comb my beard out. And all you see are your flaws, right? Well, we're that way with ourselves mentally as well. When we look at our lives, when we look at our personalities, when we look at ourselves in any way, we are inclined to only ever see our flaws. That's what we do a lot of times. But it's important for you to know that when God looks at you, he looks at you the way he did Gideon. And when he looked at Gideon, all he saw was his potential as a mighty man of valor. A man of valor is a man of battle, a man of war, a warrior. He saw a mighty warrior when he looked at Gideon. In the chapter before, Judges 6, in verse 12, it says, the angel of the Lord appeared unto him and said unto him, the Lord is with thee, thou mighty man of valor. Now it's important to note that they're saying this while the guy is hiding in his barn afraid of being caught. And God is calling him a mighty man of valor. Why would he do that? Not because of what he saw or what other people saw, but because of the potential that God saw inside of him. And that he sees us the same way, guys. He doesn't see our flaws the way that we see our own flaws. He sees us for the potential that is within us, the kind of person that he can help us and grow us into and that we can become. And God doesn't look at all your flaws, and we shouldn't only ever look at our flaws either. But he also says to him to go down with Purah thy servant to the host. And we said we'd come back to this guy. This guy's important because we don't hear about him a whole lot, but he's that dude, right? He's that dude that is always there for Gideon. Man, I want to encourage you guys, learn to be grateful for the people that God's put in your life. Okay, learn to be appreciative for the Purahs in your life, you know? Because every Moses has an Aaron. Moses was like, I can't do that. I'm scared. He's like, all right, take your brother Aaron with you. Every Elijah has an Elisha. You know, every Paul has a Silas. It's that person that's there to encourage you and to, you know, strengthen you when you're feeling down, frustrated or sad or scared. You know, whether it's a sibling, whether it's a spouse, a son, a daughter, or a really good friend, everyone has someone that cares about you. And you may not always feel like there's somebody in your life that cares about you. Sometimes life makes us feel that way. Sometimes we feel like nobody cares. That nobody, I could die tomorrow and nobody would care. Somebody cares. There is somebody in your life that cares about you. I promise you, it's just sometimes really hard to see it. And it's so important for us to remember that because the devil wants you to think you're all alone. You remember that spiritual war we were talking about a second ago, the invisible battle? You wake up in the trenches every morning. You may not realize it, but you do. And he is the reason you feel that way because he wants you to feel alone. He wants you to feel like you're by yourself, but you're not. God gives you people that care about you. And even if you don't believe that, you can bank on the fact that God himself cares about you. And he promised to always be with you. Isaiah 41:17 says, when the poor and needy seek water, and there is none, and their tongue faileth for thirst, I, the Lord, will hear them. I, the God of Israel, will not forsake them. That's a powerful verse. God cares enough about you to know when you have need, and he wants to be there for you. That's incredible. So he goes down with Purah, and he sees this, and God tells him afterward, after you do this thing, your hand will be strengthened. Well, what was weakening his hand in the first place? What was weakening his hand in the first place was his own mental, sort of barrier. It was his own self-doubt. It was the fact that he didn't believe in himself. But God gave Gideon exactly what he needed, exactly when he needed it. Throughout the Bible, we see God sending encouragement to people when they need it most. One of my favorite examples is in 1 Samuel 30. In 1 Samuel 30, David has been anointed the next king of Israel, right? Samuel comes along, puts oil on his head, everybody's so happy. And then what happens? Now he's got to go fight a giant. He fights a giant and everybody's happy. He killed the giant. It's so amazing and cool. Then what happens? Well, then his mentor and his hero, the guy that he's looked up to his entire life, King Saul, he tries to skewer him to the wall with a spear. Well, so now he's on the run for the rest of Saul's life, at least. He's on the run from this man that he idolized and he loved. So he's living in this Philistine city called Ziklag. Well, he's in Ziklag and he thinks, I'll do the best I can here. So he takes his men and the men go out and they go into battle and they win that battle. Man, they're feeling good. And then you know what happens after they're feeling good? Another group of people come into Ziklag while the soldiers are out at war and the men are gone, and they burn their homes down and they take their women and their children captive and drag them off. And it's like every time David feels like he gets some kind of a victory, like the world just kind of smacks down another loss on him. So they get back and they see that their homes are burned and their families are missing. And they pick up rocks and they are literally ready to stone David. It says in verse 6, David was greatly distressed. That doesn't even cover it. David was about ready to give up. For the people spake of stoning him. He's lost his home, he's lost his idol, he's lost his family is gone. He's greatly distressed, and the men that trusted him so much are now ready to kill him. Because the soul of all the people was grieved, every man for his sons and for his daughters. But David encouraged himself in the Lord his God. Because David went apart and he said to himself, everybody else is gone. But God never gave up on me. Everybody else gave up on me. Everybody else called me a failure, a loser. God never did that. And God has told me not to give up on myself, so I'm going to do this favor for this one, for God, who's always been there like nobody else was. He encouraged himself in the Lord. That's exactly what happens here with Gideon, that the Lord encouraged Gideon and heard all these amazing things. You know, just like Gideon and just like David, God sends us encouragement. He does. He sends us encouragement, but it comes in all kinds of different forms. It comes in all kinds of different ways. And in order to see it, we got to keep an eye out for it. Because it might not be a Bible verse, right? It might not be a clip from a sermon necessarily. It could be a lyric in a song. God's speaking to you through that lyric, trying to encourage you. It could be a line from your favorite movie. And you're watching that, and it just speaks to you in a way it never spoke to you before. A God trying to encourage you. It could be a text message somebody sent you. You know, something somebody just kind of casually said along their way. That could be God trying to encourage you. He sends us encouragement, and he sends us exactly what we need, exactly when we need it. And this is, so he's smaller in confidence, but he's greater in encouragement. And then we see in verse 16, is that he's smaller in strength, but he's greater in strategy. So, and this is a really cool battle to read about. You know, very, very fun. So it says he divided the 300 men into 3 companies, and he put a trumpet in every man's hand. Now, you would think when you're going to war, what do you want? You want a sword, a shield, you know, maybe a bow and arrow, a good weapon. What does he put in these guys' hands? Trumpets. He put a trumpet in every man's hand with empty pitchers. A pitcher is like a vessel, you know, just like a clay pot or something like that. And the lamps were within the pitchers. They were inside of them, so the lamps, you couldn't even see the light from them. This seems like odd equipment to go into battle with. And he said unto them, look on me and do likewise. So what does he say? He says, as I do, you do. When I do it, then you'll know what to do. And behold, when I come to the outside of the camp, it shall be that as I do, so shall ye do. I think we've covered that pretty well. When I blow with a trumpet, I and all that are with me, then blow ye the trumpets also on every side of the camp, and say, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. So Gideon and the 300 men that were with him came unto the outside of the camp in the beginning of the middle watch. This is the middle of the night. And they had but newly set the watch, and they blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers that were in their hands. And the 3 companies blew the trumpets and brake the pitchers and held the lamps in their hands and the trumpets in the right hand to blow withal. And they cried, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. And they stood every man in his place round about the camp, and all the host ran and cried and fled. So what just happened here? But why did all that just happen? Let me explain really quick. When you have a group of trumpeters with lamps and trumpets, that means that however many trumpeters you have probably 10 times that many guys with swords and shields and spears behind them. Right? There's a lot of archers behind them. So if there is 300 dudes with trumpets and pitchers, there are probably 300,000, you know, maybe not that many. There's probably like 30,000 guys behind that. So these, these Midianites, they see all of these trumpeters, all of these lamps, and they think there is 30,000 soldiers fixing to tear us apart. And they all, middle of the night, there's no order, there's nobody calling commands, they all just flip out and they run and literally cry and fled. They have destroyed these people in every sense of the word. So a couple of things that we read, he says, look on me and do likewise. Right? That is how leaders lead. being from Texas, we don't have a whole lot of shepherds around here. What we have is cattle drivers, right? Cattle herders. And, driving cattle is very different than leading sheep. When the Bible talks about leadership, it talks about leading sheep. What you have sometimes with some leaders is cattle drivers. You have these guys that are so interested in driving. They'll get the cattle prod. They'll do whatever it takes. Just get them where I want them to be. I don't care what happens to them. I just get them where I want them to be. I'll drive you there however I need to. And that is not the kind of leadership the Bible talks about. The Bible talks about shepherds. You know how shepherds lead sheep? They say, I'm walking this way. They don't say that because they're sheep and they can't talk, right? But they walk. And as they walk, the sheep just follow. Right? That's a leader. That's the way God wants his leaders to be. They say, you know what? I'm going this way. If you want to follow my lead, I'm going this way. And they go that way. That's the kind of leadership we need. Somebody who's going to lead by example. I want all of you guys to know somebody's watching you. Not in the creepy way through the window. Somebody is watching how you live your life. Somebody's watching you do what you do. It may be your son or daughter. It may be a niece or a nephew. It could be a student. It could be a younger sibling, a cousin, or even just a friend. But somebody is watching you do what you do. And they're basing what they do off of it. You may not feel like it, but somebody's following your lead. And God wants us to lead by example. And just say, hey, this is how you're supposed to do. Just do as I do. Gideon knew how to lead his men because he was led by God. Right? God told him what to do. He did it. And they did what he did as long as this man was following the Lord. 1 Corinthians 11:1, Paul says, be ye followers of me, even as I also am of Christ. Right? That's the important bit. We got a lot of pastors out there in the world right now who only follow their pastor, no matter what. Whether they think he's right, whether they think he's wrong, they just follow that pastor. And guys, don't follow me if you think I'm not following Jesus. If you think I've missed the mark somewhere, you keep going the direction you feel God wants you to go. Don't just take my word for this stuff. Have your own relationship with the Lord. Follow me as I follow God. Follow the leaders in your life as they follow God. But follow God. That's the most important bit. You notice they cried, the sword of the Lord and of Gideon. These 300 men charging from the top of this hill in the middle of the night, trumpets and pitchers, and they look like the advance party of an army of hundreds of thousands that was right on top of them. Gideon may not have understood the plan. You remember, he was scared. He didn't know what in the world was going on. He may not have understood the plan, and the 300 definitely didn't understand the plan. But they trusted that the Lord had a plan, even if they didn't. You get to these points in life, right? You get to these points where you don't know what the plan is, and you've tried everything, and nothing seems to be working out. You get to this place where you're like, God, I don't understand. What is even the plan? How is this ever going to lead to anything, productive or nice or successful in my life? And God says, I know you don't see it yet. And I know it would be impossible to see from where you are, but you are going to have to trust me. Because those trumpets and those lamps inside of those pitchers, they are going to lead you to victory. I know they don't make any sense right now, but you trust me and you'll see. When you get there, you'll see. That's what we got to do. We may not understand why the Lord has us on the path that we're on, but if we'll trust his strategy, then we'll understand in the moment of truth. Proverbs 3 verses 5 and 6 say, trust in the Lord with all thine heart, and lean not unto thine own understanding. In all thy ways, in every different way you can, in all thy ways acknowledge him, and he shall direct thy path. Right? So even when it doesn't make sense, even when your understanding isn't getting there, lean on God's understanding. Let him direct your path, and you'll understand when it's time to. And then notice it said, all the host ran and cried and fled like little girls. I apologize if that offends any little girls. I'm not calling you weak, I'm calling them weak. Right? The Lord took the poorest man. That's who Gideon was. He was the poorest man in the poorest family, cowering in the back of the property, and took that man and made him a mighty general for an army of 300 valiant men that struck fear into the hearts of an army of thousands. I want to end with this thought tonight, folks. Never let somebody tell you that you're not skilled enough, that you're not smart enough, that you're not strong enough. Because if the Lord brings you to a battle, He is going to give you a victory. That's our lesson for tonight. I want to thank all of you guys so much for coming in and checking us out. We will be back on Sunday morning for our Sunday school hour, assuming I can get all the kinks worked out. And but again, I appreciate you guys so much. Be sure to like this, support it in all the different ways that you can. Free, easy way to support our ministry here. Again, I super appreciate you guys, and we'll see you then. So until then, guys, bye. There's so many buttons. Whoa. The numbers on that are